Welcome back, Defenders. The Western Alliance is gathered in Munich, Germany for their annual security conference. How's it going? J.D. Vance's Munich speech met with shock, bewilderment, and almost no applause. Two people clapped for him when he finished his speech. U.S. Vice President says the biggest threat facing Europe comes from within, sparking criticism. Vice President J.D. Vance said the biggest threat facing Europe comes from within, not Russia or China. Okay, let me share with you the clip. This is about a minute and a half. This is our Vice President saying some really stupid things.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too.
So this is J.D. Vance expressing concerns about the election in Romania, while not mentioning the rigged election in Belarus, or Putin's rigged election last year. The number one concern of the Vice President of the United States is the presidential election in Romania?
Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. The situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with.
J.D. Vance has the charisma of a broken parking meter. Nobody likes this guy. Donald Trump doesn't even really like this guy. And he missed the point. He just said that if a foreign government can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on digital advertising to change the outcome of your election, then your democracy wasn't very strong. Yes, that's the whole point. Democracy is fragile. Democracy has to be protected from foreign hostile influences such as Russia. But he just completely brushed that off. And this is astonishing hypocrisy coming from the Vice President of the United States lecturing the Europeans about freedom of the press and freedom of speech. When you actually look at global rankings, where does the United States compare to Europe? Here is the map showing the Press Freedom Index. The United States ranks 55th in the world, while the top 10 placeholders are all European. Romania is ranked 49th. Freedom of speech and freedom of the press is actually better in Europe than it is in the United States. You want a recent example? You're telling me that J.D. Vance gave a fiery speech trashing all of Europe over the lack of democracy and freedom of speech 2 days after the White House revoked the Associated Press's credentials for failing to obey and use the Gulf of America in their reporting. The Associated Press had their credentials revoked from the White House for failing to use the term Gulf of America. Here are thoughts from Timothy Schneider. I'm in Munich, and people keep asking me to decode Vance's speech. Okay, in Vance English, free speech means let Elon Musk run your elections. And democracy means Let Russia run your elections. Now move on. 2025 is about what Europeans can do, not about what Americans are saying. This speech was outrageously laughable. Nobody in the Trump administration is taking any security threats to Europe serious. They don't care about Europe. Making sense of Trump's plan, if there is one, to end Russia's war in Ukraine. There is no plan. Donald Trump lied. He doesn't have a plan. Even to this day, he still doesn't have one. I want the fighting to stop. I want the killing to stop. Both Russia and Ukraine want those exact same things, except Russia wants to control all of Ukraine, and Ukraine wants all of the Russians expelled from their country. So just saying, I want the killing to stop, that's not a political goal. That is you complaining that this is happening, and you just want the problem to go away, and you don't care about the details or specifics. Donald Trump is not interested in Ukraine really at all, and he could care less what happens to the people or what happens to the borders or the territories. And it's a mess. Now that all of these Trump administration officials are in Europe talking to different people, they're all saying different things to different people because none of them know what Trump's position is on anything. Because there's no plan. Vice President Vance says U.S. troops in Ukraine is an option, contradicting the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Obviously, this made news, so he had to walk it back. It doesn't advance America's interest. J.D. Vance walks back the Wall Street Journal comments about potentially sending U.S. troops to Ukraine. Official denies Ukraine will participate in the Russia-U.S. meeting that's going to happen soon in Saudi Arabia. Russia's not confirmed they're going to Saudi Arabia, but Trump is saying they are. And National Security Advisor is contradicting this, saying that, of course, Ukraine and the Europeans will be included in the peace talks. Rubio is contradicting Waltz. Waltz is contradicting Vance. Vance is contradicting Hegseth. Like, none of these guys actually know what they're doing or what the plan is. Because there is no plan. I'm sorry, guys. Ukraine was not invited to the U.S.-Russia meeting in Saudi Arabia, according to President Zelensky. So where's General Keith Kellogg? Europe won't participate in peace negotiations, but its interests will be considered. This is what retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg is saying. The U.S. aims to engage Russia and Ukraine in negotiations within 180 days. So we went from, we're going to solve the entire war in 24 hours, to 100 days, to now 6 months. Maybe we'll figure something out. Top Trump administration officials to head to Saudi Arabia for Russia-Ukraine peace talks now? This is happening now? I understand you're tuning into this video to get clarity and comprehension, but there is none to be had, guys. You can click around on social media, you can watch other channels. Nobody has a clue what's going on, because there is no plan. And for the last 2 months, I was getting reassurance from this man, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, because Trump appointed him. It says right here in his bio, Special Presidential Envoy for Russia and Ukraine. We now know this is a lie. He is not the Special Envoy for Russia and Ukraine. He's just the Special Envoy for Ukraine. He is a pro-Ukraine, friendly face whose only purpose is to talk to the Ukrainians and make Trump look good. And he admits it. Retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg says he has nothing to do with Russia. He is never going to meet with the Russians or talk to the Russians. He is the special envoy just for Ukraine.
Dual track going. And that's important to realize. What I mean by a dual track, you've got a Russian track going on. At the same time, we've got a Ukrainian track going on. So if you look at the news, you see that you've got our envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is involved because he's got the Russian lane, and I'm working the American/Ukrainian allied lane as well. And we're doing that for speed because what we want to do is say, well, when is this?
So Trump divided up the envoys to handle the peace negotiations because why not? We're going to have friendly, competent, credible, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg talking to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and the guy who's actually going to do the negotiations with Russia is Steve Witkoff. Who the heck is Steve Witkoff? And Trump named him his special envoy for the Middle East, but he's actually the one in charge of talking to the Russians. So what does Steve Witkoff think about Russia? And he's never said a damn thing. What does Steve Witkoff think about Ukraine? And he's never said a damn thing. So we have no clue. We have no idea what this guy thinks or believes about Russia or Ukraine, and he's actually the one handling the negotiations with the Russians for Trump. Wow. No decisions on Ukraine without Kyiv in Europe, according to President Zelensky. This is President Zelensky. He's doing the best he can negotiating all this chaos. But he's saying, of course, Ukraine would never accept any kind of deal that they weren't part of, that they didn't have a say in.
Thing that President Trump said this week. He did not say yes when he was asked if he sees Ukraine as an equal member in the peace process. He did say later that Ukraine would have a seat at the table. Have you been given any assurances that Ukraine will have an equal seat at the negotiating table?
So I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. Never. And our people, never. And our adults.
I will never accept any decisions between the United States and Russia about Ukraine. Never. That is the appropriate response from the president of a nation who's been fighting off a genocide for 3 years. So here are some thoughts from Landsbergis. He's the former foreign minister of Lithuania. Once again, I am leaving the Munich Security Conference in a low mood. Amongst all the noise, the US signaled their plans for Europe, so things are becoming clearer. But things clearly are not good. This is what we know and what we now have to do about it. Ukraine can no longer rely on the United States for assistance. The US president wants a deal, and he wants it fast. Fast deals cost more for the buyer, but the United States is not willing to foot the bill. So ultimately, Ukraine will have to pay the price. The United States is no longer happy to be the main guarantee of security in Europe. There are talks of a partial withdrawal of troops and a clear shift of priorities to other continents. It's a really good thread. It's pretty long. I'll link it down below, but to my European friends, the United States is not... You can't rely on the United States for anything the next 4 years. I hope in 2028 we can have free and fair elections and we can change this administration and we can find a way in 2028 to repair the damage and heal this incredibly powerful and beneficial relationship for the United States. But the transactional nature of MAGA, they just don't see you as valuable. They don't care about you. And there's nothing you can say or do in the short term to change that. So Putin is laughing. The Russians are laughing at the Americans. The Russians are laughing at the Europeans. This is why the Kremlin spent tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars making sure that Donald Trump would return to office in order to destroy the relationship with our European partners, to destroy or weaken the NATO alliance. Donald Trump is getting pushback, but he doesn't care. He's not going to back down. Public opinion is not driving these decisions. His weird mafia ideology is. The world is going to become more dangerous. So Europe is reacting. According to the Polish foreign minister, Macron convenes European leaders to discuss Trump's actions. President Macron will host European leaders in Paris tomorrow for an emergency summit focused on challenges posed by Donald Trump. Here's a tweet from the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. Europe urgently needs its own plan of action concerning Ukraine and our security, or else other global players will decide about our future, not necessarily in line with our own interest. This plan must be prepared now. There's no time to lose. And this is what Zelensky is telling the Europeans. We must build the armed forces of Europe for future to depend only on Europeans. Zelensky gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference. I'm going to play this clip for you.
Let's be honest, now we can't rule out the possibility that America might say no to Europe on issues that threaten it. Many leaders have talked about Europe that needs its own military, an army of Europe. And I really believe that time has come. The armed forces of Europe must be created.
The European Union is a political and economic organization, but you need to add that third branch. You need to create a military component for the European Union. And you really should have started working on this 3 years ago, if I'm being honest. Ukraine's still on an irreversible path to NATO, despite Trump's stance. This is according to the UK Prime Minister. And Zelensky is not going to stop requesting this, demanding this, expecting this. I understand it's a long shot, and it probably won't happen in any way prior to 2028. But Zelensky is never going to stop saying the only security guarantee that prevents future wars is if Ukraine can join NATO.
And I also will not take NATO membership for Ukraine off the table. But right now, the most influential member of NATO seems to be Putin, because his whims have the power to block NATO decisions. And that's despite the fact that it was Ukraine's army that stopped Russia, not a NATO country, not NATO troops, but only our people and our army.
Why does Vladimir Putin have a veto power in the NATO alliance? Do countries not have sovereignty? Do countries not have the right to self-determination? Russia doesn't get a vote. And everyone in Europe needs to stop talking about Russia's concerns about NATO aggression and NATO expansion. They're the mafia states. They're the ones killing people. They're the ones signaling that more wars are coming. So how did Russia celebrate the Munich Security Conference? And they attacked Chernobyl. Russia strikes Chernobyl nuclear power plant with a drone. There's a video capturing the impact. The drone came from the north, so it came from the Belarus border. And this was deliberate. Putin did this deliberately to terrorize people, to scare people. What word is scarier than Chernobyl? There's a couple, but Chernobyl's pretty high up on the list about getting people to panic. Here is Ukrainian journalist on the ground at Chernobyl. This is Maria Avdiva.
This is how the Chernobyl confinement looks after Russian drone hit it tonight. The fire is localized, but beneath is the reactor that exploded 40 years ago, and there is still a huge threat of radiation, not only for Ukraine, but for the whole of Europe. This is why we call Russia a terrorist.
So thankfully there's not significant radiation leaks, But this is the sarcophagus. This is the containment shield that was put up around the Chernobyl nuclear site. You can just see for scale how big the containment shield is, and these are the workers on top of it. And this was a huge international effort to get this containment shield up. I watched a documentary about the sarcophagus being moved into place. After the Chernobyl events, the Soviets just covered everything up with concrete, but the concrete shell was collapsing. So Europe combined. These were engineers, technicians, and scientists from all across Europe who came to Ukraine to help the Ukrainians contain the site, because radiation doesn't respect national boundaries. So this was an engineering marvel to get this sarcophagus over the old containment sites. And Putin deliberately punched a hole in it, just to scare people. Terrorism is all that the Russian military has left, because their military is so ineffective. But what about that mineral rights deal? This is going to get weird. Ukraine is not ready to sign a mineral resource agreement with the United States. Zelensky gets it. This guy just understands exactly what's happening, and he's such a diplomat. He is so restrained in what he says and does. I don't think I could have the self-control this man currently has when speaking with Trump officials. But this is what Trump tried to do to Ukraine. Ukraine declines U.S. proposal for 50% ownership of rare earth minerals in exchange for aid without security guarantees. Initially, Donald Trump blurted out this number. He wanted $500 billion. And I actually kind of accepted it right away because I thought that was kind of a low number. It's not a low number when you think about the United States has already given Ukraine less than $200 billion. So it seemed high relative to aid the United States has already given. But Trump tried to make Zelensky sign this deal saying we'll get half of everything going forward. When estimates put Ukraine's natural resources close to or over $10 trillion. And this is such a mafia move, guys. When I saw this proposal of 50%, I immediately thought of the Batman movie, The Dark Knight, when the Joker is meeting with all the crime bosses saying, I can kill the Batman for you. And they say, how much? How much do you want to kill Batman? And the Joker just said half. I want 50% of everything you have.
If you're good at something, never do it for free.
How much you will?
Half. You're crazy. I'm not. No, I'm not.
You're crazy. Zelensky's never going to sign this, especially when there's no security guarantees from the United States military for anything. Here's thoughts from Tataragami. He's a former Ukrainian officer. Zelensky has handled negotiations very well. Despite indirect extortion, he hasn't caved to giving up resources for nothing and made it clear the United States has no plan. The only way for Trump to achieve peace is through a fair agreement with guarantees for Ukraine. We could still potentially get there with Trump, maybe. But he's going to try and do every other unethical thing first before maybe reaching the conclusion that a fair agreement with security guarantees is the only way for the United States to get anything. We're now going to go through some other headlines, guys, that depresses me as an American. But every time Donald Trump says and does something now, this is now U.S. foreign policy. Trump eyes summit with Xi and Putin shaking up the world order. His remarks on Russia and China mark a seismic shift after more than a decade of U.S. policy which has increasingly cast Moscow into the cold and largely viewed both it and Beijing as adversaries. Here is Donald Trump in the Oval Office saying he would like to have a grand summit with Xi of China and Putin of Russia.
I see one giant summit with you, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin. Yeah, I could see that. Let things calm down a little bit. You know, when I left, we had no Middle East problem. We had no Russia going into Ukraine. They never would have done.
Russian forces were in Ukraine for the entirety of Trump's first administration. He just keeps lying about this. As for no wars in the Middle East, I'm pretty sure Hamas and Hezbollah and they still existed, and they were still trying to destroy Israel.
Done it. Putin never would have done it. And I came back and we got like the whole world is blowing up. So when we straighten it all out, then I want to have one of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia. And I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that.
Okay. None of this is actually going to yield any results in anything, guys. Donald Trump is just looking for attention. He just wants a media spectacle. This meeting with Putin in Saudi Arabia and a grand summit of Xi, Putin, and Trump standing together talking about a new world order. He just wants the cameras on him. He just wants the attention. But yeah, I mean, if the leaders of Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia got together to discuss a new world order, if you're a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons, you should be very concerned that these three leaders are finding common grounds to cooperate. And what the hell is this? Trump wants U.S. defending slashed in half? How can you simultaneously say you want all NATO countries to go to 5% of GDP in military spending and then say the United States is going to cut their military budget in half? This is fantasy talk. He's just saying things. Nobody is taking this serious. Trump says he would love to have Russia back in the G7. Okay, so if you don't know what the G7 is, Russia was a part of it. It used to be called the G8 until Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. And the G8, now the G7, it is organized around shared values of pluralism, liberal democracy, and representative government. So how the hell does Russia qualify to come back into the organization? Can we have China join it? Here's an observation from Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Putin desperately wants Trump at the Moscow May 9th Victory Day parade. This would be a gigantic gift to him, one with major geopolitical consequences. Yes, I think when Putin and Trump meet in Saudi Arabia, Putin is going to invite Trump to the May 9th Victory Day parade in Moscow, and I think Trump's going to go. Trump loves military parades. Trump wants to have military parades here in the United States. That was one thing he wouldn't shut up about during his first presidency. Trump wants tanks driving down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. to show off America's military might. India to receive billions in U.S. weapons, including the F-35 stealth jet. If the United States gives an F-35 to India, then Russia has it. All of these secrets and technology within the stealth F-35, if India gets their hands on it, Russia will get a copy of everything. This is all pretty bad. Trump officials fired nuclear staff not realizing they oversaw the country's weapons stockpile. Trump administration officials fired more than 300 staffers Thursday night at the National Nuclear Security Administration, the agency tasked with managing the nation's nuclear stockpile, as part of a broader Energy Department layoffs. So MAGA is so stupid, they hate the Department of Energy because they think it regulates energy companies. That's not what the Department of Energy does. It was created by President Truman to manage nuclear weapons. And Elon Musk's flunkies fired 300 critical staffers who are in charge of securing, maintaining our nuclear stockpile. some of these people are being brought back. But this is a purge of the federal government. Anybody who is nonpartisan, or worse, a Harris supporter, thousands, tens of thousands of people who are career civil servants, nonpartisan, are being fired to be replaced with Trump toadies. People who just 100% believe everything Donald Trump says and does. This is what's currently happening to the federal government here in the United States. And then there's this. Trump tweeted this out yesterday. He who saves his country does not violate any law. This is Donald Trump saying the Constitution isn't real. We're not a nation governed by laws. We are now a nation under one man, Donald Trump, the supreme leader, the supreme commander, the God King. And it's stupid because this quote, Napoleon didn't even say this. This was a quote from a movie about Napoleon in 1970. And in the context of the movie, it's about being a dictator. Napoleon was not democratically elected. And sometimes people will use this quote to justify civil disobedience. For people like Gandhi, he who saves his country does not violate any law. For people like Martin Luther King Jr., he who saves his country does not violate the law. Laws that restrict civil disobedience, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. For the President of the United States to say this, he's saying I'm a dictator. The Constitution, federal law, the courts, Congress, nobody can check me. Nobody can stop what I want to do. So here's the game plan, guys. Resist. In every possible way you can think of. Doesn't matter how small or insignificant you think it is, it all counts. It all adds up. If you like living in a free and prosperous country, if you do, if you like living in a democratic society in which you have civil rights and protections, you need to fight for them today. This is the greatest threat to Western liberal democracy since World War II. The international rules-based order is breaking down right in front of our eyes, guys. So at the moment, the leader of the free world is President Zelensky, and I have to put all my faith and hope in Europeans that they can support Ukraine long enough for Russia to collapse. We need this tripod of the United States, Russia, and China not to be able to stand tall. We have to knock out one of the legs, and right now Russia is on the ropes. So Ukraine is doing what they can. Drone strike causes blaze at Russian industrial site in Kaluga Oblast. Drones hit apartment building and target an oil refinery in Volgograd. The campaign to destroy Russia's economy is still on. This is the winning strategy. Ukraine is not holding back. It doesn't really matter what Donald Trump does in the short term. The Russian economy weakens more as debt rises and the price of oil falls. Russia's central bank holds key rate at 21%, says inflation pressure remains high. Russia is screwed. Long term, but we need action soon, guys. If there's anything that Ukraine hasn't been doing or has been holding back on, now's the time. We need to speed things up. Russia needs to collapse as soon as possible. So normally at the end of my videos, I have good news, and this was a bad weekend. It was bad. But the Czech Artillery Initiative has delivered 1.6 million rounds of large caliber artillery ammunition to Ukraine. Thank you so much, the fantastic people of the Czech Republic. Rheinmetall has increased their 155 millimeter ammunition production. They're now producing 750,000 rounds per year. That's good, but it needs to go higher. Final clip. These are, I assume, protesters in Georgia. They saw this Russian flag hanging on the balcony for a Youth Olympic Winter Festival, and they decided to rip this flag down.
Bravo! Ukraina lebi gwakhmarebian. Agre! Молодец! Slava Ukraina! Bravo! Bravo! Agre! Ura! Ura! Emase! Ura! Bravo! So,
Russia will be defeated. I'm still confident of this. But I know for a lot of people, they just don't understand, why is Donald Trump doing this? Why is America acting this way? And I laid out my arguments to explain what's happening in my question and answer video I uploaded yesterday. I know some people who watch my channel, you skip the Q&As. This one is 55 minutes, and I don't think I can make a more clear explanation of how Donald Trump and MAGA thinks about this world and what this means for the existing international democratic community. So I'm going to link my Q&A from yesterday down below. I highly recommend you check it out if you want a deeper understanding of the way that Donald Trump views the world and potentially what MAGA's plan is. Okay, that's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I do love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.